Welcome to Profiling Evil by Mike King. Today we're going to look at the case of a missing mother from Kansas named Angela Green. We're here with her daughter Ellie, who has gone on a rather interesting journey since June 19th, the last time that she saw her mother in 2019. Ellie has taken the challenge and responsibility of trying to figure out where her mother is because she's not seeing action anywhere else in the family. So let's jump into the case. Ellie, you're here with me and Chris McDonough. You've met us before as not only part of investigations that Dr. Phil hired us to conduct in behalf of his show, but our ongoing efforts to try to help you as you look for your mother. So thank you for being with us. We thought it might be interesting to just start off and have you tell us a little bit about who Angela Green is so that our listeners can get an understanding of who your mother is.
Okay, yeah, sure. Well, first off, thank you guys so much for all the work that you've done and put into this. And I know my mom would be very, very appreciative and grateful for that. She was my rock. She was my person that I look up to. Did every little thing perfectly. It really annoyed me. she basically dedicated her life to me. She was born in China, studied English there, and her parents were professors. And then she did some newscasting and ended up in insurance work, came over to the U.S. after meeting my dad in Beijing, and then had me a couple years later. And never had a job in the U.S., kept a tight circle, so she didn't speak English perfectly, but she did put all of her efforts into raising me and took thousands of pictures. She did help out with my friends, my school. She was a room parent. She made all of my friends like musical costumes. She'd make lunch for my teachers, and one of them reached out to me the other day after hearing about this, and she said, like, I still remember how she cut all the vegetables into little shapes and gave them to us for lunch one day. But yeah, just did so much for the community around her, even though she came from a very different place, and I'm sure she was unfamiliar with this one, but still tried her best to help out in some way, which I definitely admire a lot more now, and I really appreciate the way that she raised me and made me perform well academically and instilled a very strong work ethic in me. So I'm happy.
Your mom sounds like an incredibly selfless human being that dedicated her entire life to her family and the success of her prized possession, you.
Most selfless person that I know, for sure. Yeah, gave it everything and didn't expect anything in return. It's like crazy that I don't think that I will ever find someone like her. Yeah, truly. I'm very, very thankful.
You know, we were really touched early on when we learned about your mom, how she felt about even American holidays, and the fact that here she is, a Chinese national who comes to a country that she's unfamiliar with, a language that she doesn't. It's a second language, English to her. She met your father in China and came over, and a few years after getting back to the United States, she starts this family. But Chris, I mean, how amazing was it just her feeling about the 4th of July?
Yeah, I mean, she was a constant figure in the garden, wasn't she?
She
Right?
was, yeah, she would, she fixed up all the community islands, those traffic islands that you see driving around, and would put American flags in all the pots and change out the flowers so they match whatever holiday. Yeah, I was took a lot of pride in being an American. That's for sure.
You know, as you know, we had the opportunity to interview your neighbors as part of the Dr. Phil show, and every one of them to the T talked about how your mother felt about the 4th of July and making sure the American flag was out in that little island and making sure that patriotism was an important part of your family. But beyond that, they talked about how she was such a perfectionist when it came to caring for the yard, and that she was out there just working all the time, picking up even a leaf that fell off the tree.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of immigrants can relate. Like, they work so hard to kind of earn their place, or like they're so appreciative of the opportunities here that they work really hard. But for my mom, English wasn't her first language, and so she didn't quite know how to do that. And her way of showing was through the community and the people around her, and that was how she showed her appreciation and worked really hard.
Yeah, she instilled that in you. That's for sure, huh? I mean, and you're a smart young lady as well. I mean, how many languages do you speak?
About 4.
4 languages, yeah. And that's your mom right there, right? I mean, the meticulous, let's get it done type of personality. So, your mother's a very, very, very important person, and we're grateful that you're here with us to share her story.
Yeah, we think it's so important, Ellie, that people understand who the individual of focus is. In the criminal world, we call it victimology, or the study of who this person is. And you've really helped us start to understand that. You went on to become the valedictorian of your school. You are ahead of schedule in college. That all comes from having a support system at home that really was helping propel you along. And gosh, what a great tribute to her to have somebody like you, that not only we see her face in you when we look at the pictures of you, especially when you were younger and your mom was younger, but we see also your tenacity and her tenacity. I think it's interesting that with that, and with this mom who made sure there were little colorful notes in your lunch pail each day when you went to school, and made sure that she called you when you were going to college to touch base with you, that she also had great expectations and probably great demands that she placed on you. But as we looked at the victimology, or the study of your mom, we also saw that she really didn't go out and do things on her own. She wasn't an adventurous person who would head off and go shopping even by herself. Why don't you tell us a little bit about her from that perspective?
Yeah, I mean, she wasn't entirely comfortable here, mainly because of the language barrier.
And let's see, Ellie, hang on a sec. I think we lost the audio for a second. Chris, you got her?
No, I'm not hearing her.
So Ellie, we'll be able to dub this, but why don't you go back, and I'll say she didn't go out much, and start there, because we can hear you now.
So I think that the main thing was the language barrier, and that caused her to not want to put herself out there as much as she could have, and like live for her almost, and have those experiences. So yeah, she drove me to and from school every day, and that was her main focus, was definitely me, and just did everything she could for me instead, to kind of make up for what she couldn't do herself. And then I had to step up and be that child who would make her proud too.
Well, I'm sure that you do make her proud. You and your mother would speak Chinese quite often. Your dad didn't understand Chinese, I understand. So that probably was a great time for you to ask for things that he might have said no to do it in Chinese. But that had to have been a little frustrating for him too. And did you ever see any kind of period of time where he would say, "Hey, make sure you're talking in English"?
Well, honestly, my mom and I spoke in Chinese pretty much all the time. Um, but I saw like my parents had a hard time communicating. Like I spoke Chinese with my mom, spoke English with my dad, but then I was also kind of the mediator for both of them. Um, and my mom sometimes would want to express some things, but my dad didn't understand too much Chinese. So then she'd get frustrated and throw something, and that was her way of expressing what she wanted to have, like pay attention to this, and then yeah, so a little bit of a temper thrown in there, and I tried to help out with the language thing as much as I could, and that it usually helped a lot, to step in and realize that one person was saying something entirely different from what the other person thought was happening.
Sure. A double whammy, right? You not only have the language barrier, but then you have the frustration of trying to make your point,
Right, yeah.
and maybe
Yeah.
she's not making it correctly, so she makes the point, right? So
Right. Yeah.
yeah, no, I totally get that. I think everybody will totally get that for sure. Yeah. So then
Yes.
there came. Go ahead, Mike.
Well, I was going to say, so you then graduate from high school. You
Yeah.
get to go out and do some foreign study abroad. With foreign study abroad, you get to go out and do some study abroad, and you're now back in school, and you're working. And let's go to the night of June 19th. This is a Wednesday night, and you come home and you get into a little bit of an argument with your mom, and why don't you talk through what happened that night, and then just kind of help us understand what happened over the days that followed.
Everything seemed to be fine from the past couple days. I'd just come back from Italy and had stayed there for it had just been like 3 days, and I'd planned on staying there for the rest of the summer. And she packed my lunch that morning, said I love you, sent me off. I came home, and I don't know where her mind was at. I still don't entirely know, but she wasn't happy with me going off to college basically, and her not having me there all the time, and that control, and that like being able to take care of me and make sure I was safe the whole time. She didn't know who I was, with all the time, hanging out with. And as a mom, as a parent, I don't fully understand, but I can see how that's frustrating and that's worrying. So she took that out on me that night, and she decided to basically like get the problem out temporarily, which meant like kicking me out. Um, and after talking to some like other people who also have immigrant parents, this actually has happened before, like just with a kind of a cultural thing where they will kick you out, and not because they don't love you, it's not because they mean to even, it's just something that happens. As kind of their only like outlet, because again she didn't necessarily know how to communicate everything or rationalize her emotions, so took it out on me and kicked me out. So I I actually cried in the park for half an hour, and then while I waited for my boyfriend to come to talk to me, and he took me back to his grandparents' house for that night. But yeah, I backed out of the driveway, sobbing, and I never saw her again, even though I expected that to blow over in half an hour, tomorrow. Didn't expect it to be such a long time.
Now, were you sitting out in the driveway at your house?
We were talking in the garage.
Both you and your mom?
Yeah, in the house
And
and
where,
in the garage.
mhm. And where was Dad?
Dad was in the house.
Okay. And then when you were crying, was your mom consoling you at that
No, she
point,
was
or
yelling at me.
she was yelling at you? Okay.
Yes.
And so it sounds like your mom's going through a little like separation anxiety. Would that
Yeah.
be a correct a way
Yeah.
to assess
I'd
that?
say separation anxiety, something about like me being independent, but her wanting me to still have some dependency on her
Hmm.
was,
Hmm.
and I'm the only child, so she had to
Yeah.
spend a lot of time in that house with my
Yeah.
dad alone, and when her life was basically me. So
Yeah. So maybe in your culture too, right? In mom's culture, it sounds like her fallback position is because you guys are kind of having a little friction just to say, you know, get out of here,
right,
basically.
yeah.
Would that be accurate?
Yeah, I know
Okay.
she didn't want me gone forever. I know that she didn't mean it. I knew that in the moment too. So
Hmm.
that's why it was such a shock afterwards when she was gone.
That's really something that's rather normal, is this empty nest experience that parents go through. Also, this understanding that they know it's a rite of passage that you have to go through, that you start to separate too, and it may have even been a way for her to have a little bit of control in her own life by saying, okay, it's time to get away, even knowing how hard that was on your mother and you, because that naturally had to start happening. But I think you mentioned something that behaviorally is really interesting that I'd like to hear a little more about, and that is that your dad went off into another room. How did your father usually act when there was conflict between the two of you? Would there be a referee, or would it be, I'm going to get out of here until the storm blows over?
Well, that night he had tried to calm her down. So in the case of like her um, not being able to calm down from whatever argument she had in her head going on, because I never talked back to her honestly. I just sat there and waited for blowover, and I just took it. And he would do the same thing. So he would wait for it to blow over too. But that night he tried to calm her down, and she wouldn't, and she told me to leave. So then, um, yeah, I don't know what happened after that.
Was
What
his
did he?
demeanor?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Chris. Go ahead.
No, I think you and I were on the same track. Go ahead, Mike. Ask the
Was
question.
his demeanor different that night, or was it consistent with the way he normally dealt with her when he was trying to set a draw a line in the sand?
No, I wouldn't say it was any different from the way he acted before, and that's just how he always acts. Is wait for her to calm down. If she doesn't, then I'll go and talk to her. And I never saw him be physically violent with her ever. Never.
Yeah. You say he was trying to calm her down. What did he do?
You tell her this seriously needs to stop. You're being ridiculous. Kind of listen to yourself. Think about who you're yelling at. Like trying to rationalize her because she couldn't in the moment, basically.
And where were you? Where was he? And where was your mom collectively during this conversation? Were you in the living room? Were you in the garage? Where's this conversation taking place?
I was mainly in my room. My
So you went to your room at some point.
yeah, I was in my room, and then
Eh,
she was out in the kitchen, and he was in his room. Came out to talk to her.
Okay, and you overheard this, or did you come out of your room to see them talking?
I overhear everything. Not a
Yeah,
big house. Sound travels
yeah,
pretty well.
yeah. No, I get that. And so you hear him, talking to your mom about, just kind of calming down, right?
hmm Yeah,
Okay, how did that make?
I
No, go ahead.
I had no idea. Like I couldn't keep track of her train of thought that whole entire time. Like it went on for 2 or 3 hours, and I really couldn't keep track of where it came from or
Sure,
any like. Most of my life, I had always been able to predict like why she was upset.
sure.
This time I couldn't, and maybe that was like I wasn't there for a year, and so I didn't know what was happening. But I decided I had enough, so I went out there, and then she was like, "Nope, you're actually gonna leave now."
So correct me if I'm wrong on the sequence here, okay? It sounded like this went on for a considerable amount of time, enough to where your dad separates, goes into the room for a while. Your mom separates, goes into the kitchen for a while, but she's still saying stuff, and you go into your room for a while, okay? And does it subside for a second, or is it a constant? Is it constantly moving
I'd
as an
say
argument?
like it subsides a little bit. It's kind of like a roller coaster, but that roller coaster keeps like climbing. So at some point she just
Sure.
like she'd kick me out. So every time I thought it was gonna die down, it just got even worse. So which had
Okay.
never happened before, and I'd never been kicked out of the house before.
And once you get that, ultimatum, you're out of here. What does dad do to you about you? What does he come to you? Does he go to mom? How does he handle that?
Well, I actually don't think that he was there. Well, because he was inside the house, and then my mom and I were in the garage, and she told me to leave, and those were her. She was giving me her last word at the time. So I left, and I don't even know that he thought I would leave. So I don't.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So Ellie, you leave the home, and then the next day, June 20th comes. You don't hear anything until 8 o'clock at night when your dad texts you. How normal would that be for you to go 24 hours without your mom reaching out and saying something to you?
Well, he reached out that night. I think that night at about 8-9 p.m. asking where I was staying. Told me to go to Brad and Marva's, my aunt and uncle's house, to talk about mom. I mean, I had just like been kicked out, and I was like, I don't want to talk about this right now or deal with it at the moment, because I was hurt, but I had expected an apology or a call or something from mom when she had cooled down and wanted to talk rationally again, but that never happened.
You were in the garage. You were kind of explaining when you left. You got a text message from your dad, and he was asking you where you were going to stay that night.
Right.
It was that out of character for him, if seeing how this is the first time you've ever been kicked out of the house?
Well, first of all, I don't know because it was the first time, but
Okay.
he didn't say anything about how mom was behaving, which was a little out of character. Yeah, it wasn't like she's calmed down, so now you can come back, which is what I had expected.
But did he make sure you weren't going to be out in the cold? Like, did he
Yeah,
did he
he
say, I
did.
want to make sure you're going somewhere and you're going to be gone, or what?
You want to make sure I was safe. Yeah, I was somewhere. Yeah, wasn't sleeping in my car. You did want to know that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Okay,
that's
and
when
then and then we roll out, and it's the next day. How normal would it be for your mom not to communicate with you within 24 hours?
Probably. I mean, a little unusual, but because of how upset she was, I wasn't terribly concerned because I just figured she's still upset and doesn't want to talk to me. So instead, my dad is. But after like 2 or 3 days, then it's definitely not right.
Yeah. So
You're-
that night on the 20th, you get an email or a text message from your father saying, I'm over at your uncle and aunt's house, and maybe we should talk about mom. What can you tell us about that evening?
That confused me because it didn't say at all where mom was. So was she still at the house, and did she not go with him? Did she kick him out? Like, that didn't give me any detail really. But he just wanted me to go over, and I said no, because I mean, I was the one who was kicked out. I don't want to go back and try and deal with it with you. Like, you should. In my mind, it was like you were the one who was supposed to apologize to me and tell me to come back, which didn't happen.
Yeah, you said that his text, and we've seen those texts, said, "How are you?" and we need to talk about mom. So from that, did you sense whether she was even possibly at the house with him, or was he there alone and wanting to talk to you?
Well, from that text, he was at Brad and Marva's, but I just didn't know whether she was there too, whether she was still at the house, whether it was still. I kind of thought that it was still so bad that she had kicked him out, because she's kicked him out before. So then she was so upset that she's kicked him out.
Where would he go
Yeah.
when that happened
He'd still
in
go
the
to Brad and
past?
Marva's, or he'd go to a friend's house, or he'd get a hotel room for the night.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, unfortunately, right, you're caught in the middle of this one, and where you're getting blamed, and now you're outside. So you have every right in the world to feel all those feelings that you've had for, quite
Well,
some
I
time
mean,
here.
I blame myself plenty for what happened. So,
Well,
I'm
that's
working
kind of,
on not, but yeah,
that's
it
kind of where
is.
I'm going here with that piece of it, because, you know, a reasonable person would do exactly what you did. Okay, and so I know you're processing that, but
Yeah.
so at some point though, who did you confide in the moment you were kicked out of the house? Can I ask you that question?
Yeah. My best friend and my boyfriend.
I was just say, what did you tell your best friend?
My mom kicked me out of the house. That's what I said. And I was like, I'm crying. So then she called me immediately and stayed on the phone with me until Zach got there.
Did she come over too to you
No,
guys
she
get?
wasn't. She was in St. Louis, so she was not there.
Okay, okay, um, okay. Did that make you feel better a little?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. She sent me a song to listen to, an empowering song. So that was
Okay.
sweet.
So, Ellie, a couple of days then go by, and there's no communication that we're aware of. And you get to Sunday morning at 8:04 a.m. and you receive another text from your father. The text says, "M is getting mental health care, and I'm home beginning to organize. Come by anytime. Front door is open." He then texts you later in the evening and says, "I'm going to need help going through mom's things." Tell us about that experience and exchange. And again, now we're talking Sunday. So we've gone from June 19th, fast forward 4 days. You've had no contact with your mom during that time. And then you get this text from your father.
Mm-hmm. He had been talking about getting her mental help. So my first initial thought was, oh, he's helping her and trying to treat whatever mentally she had going on. And then secondly, my thought was, does she have all of her things? Does she need anything? Her clothes, her food, like purse, everything like that? Like, where the heck was she? And then he had been he said he was talking to insurance people, he'd been talking to mental health people. So it wasn't shocking that he said the mental health thing. It was a shock that she was gone, and it was a shock that he actually carried out what he had started to say, if that makes sense.
So there had been false threats of getting mental health care, but you thought finally he's actually done it.
Right. Yeah, which surprised me. Yeah.
Yeah, and of course, at that time, he indicates that he's put her into a mental health facility, and you had some questions about that were unanswered. What can you tell us there?
Yeah, I mean, every time I texted him, "Where was mom?" he literally would not answer. So then I went in person and asked him where mom was, and he would kind of gaze off in the distance and then say like down south somewhere. And then I asked if I could go visit, and he said that he didn't want me to go visit until she was getting better. He didn't want me to tell her family until he knew more about her condition. He even said that he went to go visit her and she got physically violent. So that's why he didn't want me to go see her.
What did that down south somewhere mean to you?
To me, that meant somewhere in Johnson County down south. But I mean, I realized quite quickly after that could be like any state down south, Texas, Oklahoma, anywhere.
Why do you think he presented that as a answer to your question?
Like, why do I think that now, or why do I think that at the moment?
Yeah, either one.
I mean, now if that's actually where she is, and he's saying down south, because that's where her body is basically. Maybe more like a subconscious thing. At the time, I thought a mental institution in southern Johnson County.
Does your father have any connections to anybody down south?
Don't think so.
So it was kind of,
almost like Florida, but no one in Texas, no one in Oklahoma. His family's in Overland Park, which is south, but don't know.
So this troubled you enough, Ellie, that you actually asked him some questions to start probing a little more strongly there. You asked him about which hospital she was in. He couldn't tell you, and yet he also told you that he had been there and had to leave because things didn't work out right. So there starts to be some concerns, and our mindset is that we want to trust certainly and believe, and so you allowed that to happen. But then you started being troubled because you, when you did go to the home, you realized that your mom's purse and makeup and everything was still at home, and behaviorally. Your father told you that he actually took her to a grocery store to meet mental health workers, and that she would have gone out with the guys that they were going shopping. Would she have gone shopping without putting makeup on or without taking her purse with her or other kinds of things?
No, she wouldn't have gone anywhere without taking anything, whether that's going grocery shopping or whether that's running away. So she knows a little bit better than that. Yeah, but my dad had, like, things made me more suspicious over time. Like, initially being told things like she was gone, she was dead, those things shocked me, and I had to process them. Mainly because I figure if someone tells you something so intense that it's not untrue, I wouldn't tell you that somebody's dead unless they really were. So I believed it and took it at face value and processed it emotionally how I could. But logically, when he didn't tell his coworkers, he told me not to tell her family. Every time I asked him about things, before, when she was alive, we openly talked about mom all the time. Like, of course we did. And then after, he would always just shut down, never want to answer anything. So slowly I got more and more frustrated. And yeah, I just eventually told her family.
So Ellie, time rolls on. About 6 weeks pass. During this time, you have multiple conversations with your father, trying to find out where you can go visit your mother in the hospital, and you are told that the timing just isn't right, and you never are told where she is or how to visit her. And then time passes to the point July 16th rolls around, and you receive some news from your father. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. I was actually on my way to a frisbee tournament in Blue Valley. So he wanted to talk to me in person, and I was like, okay, I won't be home until 10:30, 11 or so. And he said, that's fine. I still have to tell you. So later that night, he came to Zach's house, and in the street, driveway-ish, he told me Angela died of a stroke. Um, Tried to hug me. I didn't really want to be at the time, and the whole world kind of went fuzzy, and I basically like crouched in the driveway and just was in shock for a good amount of time.
So sorry. That had to have been just absolutely gut wrenching for you. You then go through a period of days where there's confusion about whether there's going to be a memorial service, whether you can talk to family about this. Describe what was going on then.
Yeah, I mean, he never opened up about telling people. I had asked, have you told your coworkers? Have you told your family or mom's family? And he always said that he wasn't ready or hadn't done it yet. Yeah, told me not to tell mom's family. And he wasn't ready to have a memorial service or funeral, which honestly at the time I didn't want to see my mom's dead body. And I thought, like, okay, like people have memorials a few months after, or yeah, so if he's not ready, I wanted to respect him in grieving too, because I figured that's also what he was doing. Yeah, I just always had thought that he had my best interests and my mom's best interests at heart, and I don't know, like looking back, if that was always the case, but he was my dad, and growing up I didn't have any reason to not trust him, so I basically wanted to process it emotionally as much as I could first. And he had said, like, I have medical records, but I am not ready to look at them. He wanted help with writing an obituary, and he said he would do that and never did. So it was kind of like he was buying time almost.
Yes, there you are. I mean, you're talk about full effect of shock, right?
Yeah,
I
I was in
mean,
shock and denial for 2 months, and then grief for like actual depressed grief type of situation for another 2 months, and then slowly accepting it, like even realizing that that was my reality, because losing my mom was always my worst nightmare. Like, that has always been my worst fear.
sure.
And then to have that taken away from me, just I had a ton of anxiety. Days where I was depressed, it was a mess and it was horrible. So
Mm-hmm.
Well, and in your defense, Ellie, when we looked into this case, one of the first questions we had was what the dynamics were in your life when it came to mourning and the loss of someone. You'd never experienced loss.
Yeah.
You'd never even attended a funeral. So this is something that was completely new to you, and you had to again take a second seat to decisions that your father was making. But the thing that became so strange is that he told you, well, I've talked to someone on the phone. He never made an identification of the body. He talked to someone on the phone who said, hey, we can cremate your mother or your wife. And he decides that's a good idea. But he says, I'm going to go out and shop online and buy an urn while you're cremating her and somehow get the urn in your hands to put your mother's remains in, and then have someone mysteriously show up on his porch asking for $1,500 in cash to exchange for the urn. Now, again, in your defense, you'd never gone through this experience, but even then, you started seeing these red flags popping up all over that were just saying, this story isn't making sense. Can you talk about that at all?
Yeah, well, when he told me he got a call from work and he didn't excuse himself, I knew that was a red flag. So I knew his like all those points that you just talked about with his story, I knew all of those were wrong immediately. And he said someone came to the door, and I have no idea who he was. He was Caucasian, 40s, male, like the most basic description he could come up with. And he didn't ask any more questions, but just handed over $1,500. No matter how, I don't think that he would have ever given away money just like that in cash in such a pretty large sum. He's pretty tight with his money. Like, he likes to know where it goes and who's wanting it. So he would definitely ask more questions, and he definitely excused himself from work. Even when I call him, he'll excuse himself and go in another room, much less a call from the hospital where your wife died, I feel like. And I know that my mom never partied, never drank, never smoked, so him using that excuse to the authorities and saying she's out partying with friends and will be back later that night, like that, I personally, I was like, that's a really bad lie that you're telling. Like,
Yeah, we're gonna actually,
that's a pretty bad one. So
we're gonna actually come back to that and to kind of then see how this snowball starts growing. It's about a week before Thanksgiving that he finally tells his siblings, your father tells your aunts and uncles, that your mother died. But interestingly, then he tells them that she died at home, which is really intriguing to us because we see this story starting to evolve and change. Then by September, well, reaching a little earlier than that, around this same time, your father asks you to sign a life insurance policy because your signature resembled your mother's, and it would just help kind of in the processing of things for her estate. Again, you're the child. You're not the adult in this situation, and you're doing what your father asks you to do. But the clock keeps ticking and moving on. And Chris, if you remember, we talked about the fact that then in December, all of a sudden there's a decision to buy a different piece of property, and a piece of property is purchased in another part of the state about an hour west of where you lived. And there, it's like there's starting to be kind of a shift in behavior. But we see 2019 kind of come to an end. What was that Christmas time like for you, Ellie? Because all of your neighbors describe how every year your home was lit with a tree and with lights, and your mother again was one to make sure you had a rich holiday experience. And now it's Christmas in 2019.
Yeah, I mean, first off, also about the life insurance policy, he had told me it was a retirement benefit document because he was retiring at the end of the year. So, yeah, completely different than what that said. And then let's see, I actually did not know that he told his family that she died at home until like a few months ago. Like I did not actually know that because otherwise I would have known something was wrong then. But I didn't know that he said that she died at home, so that really threw me off because they all told me he said that she had died of stroke, but that's all they said. And then yeah, he bought a house. He he went Black Friday shopping with me, gave me what I wanted for my birthday, for Christmas, tried in every single way to do everything possible to like distract me almost. Like he got a house so that I could live there with my friends the next year, and he was always like, what color wall do we get? What color tile? Basically just pushing me with that. And on the other hand, I was trying to push him to answer questions about mom. So yeah, he'd be like, what color tile do you want? And then I'd ask like, where did mom die? So a very weird dynamic the whole entire end of like December. And um, Christmas, the year before, we had gone to Brad and Marva's house. So we did that again, but instead it was very empty. Nobody talked about mom. When I asked questions, no one wanted to talk about mom. Yeah, it was very quiet. It was very weird. Like no one addressed the elephant in the room. So it was a very awkward thing that was hanging over and no one addressed it. Just all the
Tell our
happiness.
viewers who Brad Marva are. Tell everybody who they are so that everybody gets context here.
Brad and Marva are my aunt and my uncle. So
On your
my
dad's side.
brother.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. I just didn't want you going too far down.
No, that's okay. And they had moved to Kansas City. I think like 5 years now or so, but yeah, 4 or 5 years now. So it was recent. And my mom had even helped them move into this house and carried all their furniture. So she helped out a lot. And then for them to not want to talk about her or help with this case has confused me a lot and been disappointing. But yeah, all the happiness and light and just joy around Christmas and Thanksgiving that she brought, it wasn't there. And that was really tough. I remember going back to my house on Christmas Day after being at Brad Marva's, and I know that I said something about mom like not being there, and I said like I know it's really tough and I'm sorry. I think something like that. But I hugged him. I don't know. It felt very like it was weird. Obviously something missing. I could tell that he was missing her. I've always been able to tell that. Just not in the way that I thought she went, I guess. But
describe
I cried
that.
the whole way home that day, I remember.
Describe your observations of your dad.
I mean, every time I brought her up, he seemed on the edge of tears. So to me, it looked like he was grieving always. And that's why I didn't want to push him terribly much. Like I always asked a little bit, or I threw in her name occasionally in a conversation. I didn't see him that much either, but when I did, like I tried to say something to see how he would react, and it always was he didn't want to talk about it because he was almost going to cry, and he just wasn't ready to talk about it. He wasn't ready to tell people. So yeah, I just didn't want him to either blow up at me or like make it worse than it was. So I had to kind of like tread carefully. It was difficult.
In the past, how does your dad express his emotion?
We talked about mom all the time. There was no problem with that.
So was this out of character for him?
Oh yeah, yeah. I felt like I was grieving alone too, which is unfortunate.
Wow. So Ellie, 2019 comes to an end, and something happens inside to you. And while there is no question that you continue to grieve, you start to have a fire building up inside of you that you need to represent your mom and find out what's going on. And Chris and I, when Dr. Phil asked us to investigate this case, that was the thing that became so compelling to us after our first interviews with you, was what happened. And so what we saw is in February, you finally disregarded all of his wishes and let your family know that your mother was deceased by all rights in your mind. You reached out and talked to her sister, who lives in New York City and is older. And you also came into contact with your cousin, Michelle, who's a lawyer in New York City. And one of her first questions was, where's the death certificate? And you hadn't been able to produce that, but you went out and started digging, and you became an investigative person. And you went to the state of Kansas, and you found that there was no death certificate, that there was no cremation permit authorized. You reported that to your cousin, who immediately contacted the Prairie Village Police Department and asked for what we call in law enforcement a welfare check. And law enforcement showed up at your residence and wanted to know where Angelo, your mom, was. You talked about that a moment ago, about how your father explained to them that she was out partying with friends for the weekend, which had to have just completely rocked your boat, didn't it?
Oh yeah. I had been slowly getting more frustrated and basically angrier with my dad the whole entire time. But then January, December-ish, I finally got like both of my feet on the ground. Like I wasn't as anxious, I wasn't as sad about it, and I had accepted a whole lot. Like it had been 6 months, so I kind of processed a lot more emotionally, and I was ready to kind of face a lot more, which I had no idea how much I would have to, but I did. And yeah, I even in January I wrote down a list of all the questions that I had that were, most of them were just like yes or no. It really was pretty simple. And then I wanted like questions that weren't a lot of emotions attached with them, because I knew that it seemed like that had hurt him, or that's kind of what got to him, so he didn't want to talk about it. So I wrote down these like questions that he could answer with one word, and then he said he would answer them. I came back the next weekend, they weren't done. So like I text him, I know he doesn't answer, I'll talk to him, he won't talk to me. So what if I like write them down? Can he write them down and think about them and then give them back? That didn't work. So I got frustrated enough, and I thought, of course, like the one thing that somebody deserves, especially her, is for her family to know, and that's the least you could do for her. So I hadn't talked to my mom's sister ever by the phone, like I had through mom, but never. She didn't even know my phone number. And so I called her one night in February, and basically cried for a minute and couldn't get out what I was even trying to say. And finally, I just said, "Mom died," and her first thought was like, "Why didn't your dad tell us?" That was her first question, and mainly because he's the one that does a lot of the communicating. So, yeah, that's why, like, it wasn't really my place to tell, but it's the least I could have done for her. And then I asked him the next day where the death certificate was, because that was family's next question. And my dad had said up until that point, like, he had it at the house and he just needed to look at it. He didn't remember, like, he had all these records at home that he wasn't ready to look at it. And finally I confronted him one day and I just said, like, what state did Mom die in? And he said, Kansas. I said, no, it wasn't. And he actually got mad at me and said, well, how do you know? And I said, because I went to Topeka and looked for it, and there wasn't one, which my stomach sank when they couldn't find one, and I knew something was wrong. Like, I knew for sure that something was very wrong. Like, obviously I'd known that there were not little, but pretty big, some red flags there. And yeah, so he said he would go back home and look at the death certificate because he didn't remember what state it was, which I was like, you don't know what state your wife died in? And I told him to send a picture of it to me later that day. He said, okay. I asked for it that night, never got a response. So that's the last time that I've seen him in person, is back in February. And then the police, of course, Michelle asked for a welfare check. The police went and knocked on the door and asked him where she was, and he said that she was out partying with friends, which I thought, holy crap, like, that's such a bad lie, Dad. And why are you lying to the police? Like, you worked for the government for 20 years. You would obviously know. So, no, I knew something was wrong. Yeah.
I can understand where you're coming from and totally empathize where you're at, because you're still, that's still your dad and that's still your mom. And you're kind of in this, this middle ground. You want to believe him, but you don't want to believe him, because now you're, as Mike said, you've kind of kicked into, mini detective mode here. You've got your cousin on board, and you're starting to really ask some serious questions, the type that, as you said, evoke emotion. And how do you think he handled all of that initially?
I mean, I think that, well, first of all, he didn't know that I told my mom's family.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that he expected me to be as spoken as I was or am today. Because I had been, like, I don't know, I just kind of hid it at home. Like, I can speak up for myself or other people, but I never needed to at home. So, but in this case, like, I wanted to be her voice, and she can't say anything for whatever reason.
It's interesting because police weren't satisfied either, Ellie, and 2 days later they returned to check on your mom. And when they returned, they were, I would think, surprised at the reception they received from your father, and the announcement that he made when they went and tried to ask him questions. Do you want to share any of that?
Well, my understanding is that because he had said that she would be back later that night, and then changed it to she'd be back later that weekend, which bought him some more time. And they went back after that weekend, and he handed them a lawyer's card. So he hired a criminal defense lawyer in the amount of time. yeah, which was totally surprising. Like, either you report your wife missing or you want to help find her, and he's done neither of those things.
Yeah, and Chris, we watched with great interest because on March 11th, law enforcement finally went and served search warrants on both Ellie's home where she and her mom and dad lived, and a business that her father frequented often in pursuit of one of his hobbies, which happened to be automotive work. And we don't know the outcome of that, but then we see the months start to just quietly churn and move on. But Ellie, when did you move out of the home, and when did you no longer have access to the home?
Well, the night that I was kicked out, I never spent a night there since. I never spent more than a few hours there just because I didn't like it. It was eerie. It gave me a ton of anxiety. And so after the search warrant was carried out, I'm not sure when he changed the locks, but I don't have access to my childhood home anymore. And even though a ton of my things are still there, but yeah, I would think that after the search warrant, they broke down the doors, so he got a new front door, and then my key doesn't work anymore, of course. So
I think I know, Mike. We're going to get into the storyline, the map coming up here pretty quick. But I think there were a couple of places where I sensed, and I know, Mike. I sensed that there were a couple of spots in your communication with your dad where he was that close. And what I want to do is ask you about that real fast so that kind of get your feeling on that. One of them was when he had made the comment on the 19th where he basically went up to your mom and said, "Stop it. This needs to stop. And this is what has to happen." Now, that is a very specific question or a very specific comment in relationship to a behavioral change. Okay. And then he kind of says that to you on the phone in a very apologetic way. Do you remember that phone call when he said that?
I do, yeah.
What were your feelings when you heard that?
Well, I thought that he had always, he was so upset that I was kicked out that he was basically standing up for me. And yeah, that's what I thought. And I still think that too. I know he never wanted to harm her. Mm-hmm. That is what I genuinely think.
Yeah, and that's your dad, right? I mean,
yeah. Well, I knew he loved her. So,
right.
Yeah.
But then there was a second one, and the second one was you asked him to tell me the truth.
Right.
What was his response? Do you remember?
He said, "I will." After all of his rambling stories and the fake, I can't say fake, but I believe fake phone call from the hospital and the mysterious urn man, he said, "I will tell you the truth." And so, you could say that he hasn't yet, but he will in the future.
Okay.
Which is both relieving, but at the same time so frustrating.
Sure. He's leaving you hanging out there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Ellie, you then start really putting some pressure on, and you start seeing some really conflicting kinds of behaviors, and you hear some absolutely conflicting storylines that are outright admissions of lies that were being given to you over the course of time. You also found, as you were working on this new home that had been purchased, that there were some things that were really disturbing in the home. And we were able to provide that information to law enforcement. They'd never heard of that information. We promised that we would remain quiet about those until it aired on the Dr. Phil show. And that point, it was also revealed the information about the life insurance policy. And we hope that things are happening. But one of the things that Chris and I wanted to do, and that we do at Profiling Evil, is we also kind of create these little things that we call story maps. And we did one of those for your mom and for you that we hope will not only educate the public, but give you a place to kind of go back and look at things in sequence and maybe consider some things. And we hope that even law enforcement will look at and consider some of the kinds of things that maybe they haven't thought of to date. And if we could just go full screen with this, I want to just cut through a couple of things real quickly that we wanted to talk to you about. First is these are made to just really easily scroll through, and you can see there are tabs across the top where we can get information. So we can go in and we can learn about your mom and where she was born in Boding, China, and we can learn a little bit about that. We can see what some of the media has been saying. We threw in something that we talk about often on here. We call it the victim risk continuum, where people can learn more about what different levels of risk people take. But then we talk about some things that you shared personally, some things like when you went to the home prior to Dr. Phil's show and you recorded some things there so that people can get to know the neighborhood and get to know you a little better. But then we walk through everything that we've talked about with you today. So we talk about your home. We even talk about the little island where your mom would put the American flag to make sure people saw it. We threw in here some things like the text messages that you received from your dad trying to describe what was going on, and people can go in and explore that. From there, we go on and we talk about what happened in the remainder of 2019 from the time in which you had this conflict. And again, the whole purpose of this, and by the way, I just loved this photograph. I just think it's such a beautiful photograph. And everyone here is Ellie as a little baby. And you tell me that this mother would not reach out and have contact with her most prized possession. I just refuse to believe that if your mom was alive, Ellie, that you wouldn't be hearing from her. And that's a painful thing to hear, I think. But we wanted to give you a couple of things to think about. And so what we did is we went in and we looked at all of the missing, unidentified bodies and unclaimed people in the state of Kansas and in Missouri to give you a sense of how serious this problem is, and that you're not alone in this plight, that there are other families that have gone through cases where their loved ones have disappeared. But we wanted to just say it's not just that overwhelming. What we wanted to do is take it a little bit further and give you some things that hopefully law enforcement will focus on. Chris and I spend a great deal of time analyzing all of your conversations with your father, and with your permission, we're making those available to people. And so people will be able to go in and click on and listen.
What about the story you told me about, like, taking her from a parking lot and
I didn't want you to think that she had.
So we're going to let people kind of go in and explore and hear what you heard and what incensed you. And Chris, maybe you could just take 1 minute and share with our listeners just what our sense was as we listened to these conversations.
Yeah, Mike, what we picked up, Ellie, as Mike and I, analyzed your dad's conversations with you, as he'd mentioned, is that they're very reflective in nature. And meaning when an individual is trying to move the ball, for lack of a better term, what you and your cousin were able to do is, pin him down pretty much on a yes/no type of Q&A. And that's an old lawyer's skill, right? But when an individual doesn't understand what's happening, they take the conversation and they reflect away from themselves, but they take a piece of what the communicator is saying. Remember, there's a listener and a speaker. So when the speaker says something, the listener takes a piece of what they just heard and they kind of reflect it back, instead of saying to you, so what exactly did you mean by that? A reflection of that would mean, well, that's not exactly what I meant. This is what I was trying to say. Okay. And so that would be an example of what we saw a lot of what your dad was doing, and continues to do, actually. I'm sure of it to this day. But
So, Ellie, at about this time, you were also taking this incredible leap of faith, and you reached out to the Dr. Phil show and asked them, because you and your mom used to watch Dr. Phil together, and your mom loved Dr. Phil. And of course, that's how we became acquainted with you, as Dr. Phil hired us to spend some time with you and to look into your case. But you described what you found in the back of that home that was an hour west of your residence, and some things that were troubling about that. We're going to let people explore that on their own and hopefully go in there and listen. And hopefully, folks, you've watched the Dr. Phil show yourselves. But then things started exploding, and you started reaching out and talking to a lot of people. So not only did you appear on the Dr. Phil show and meet and have your case reviewed there, which 5.8 million people watched that, Ellie, that now know who your mom is. That is remarkable when you think about, you brought your mom into the public eye, and she will not be forgotten. But then you appeared on a number of other shows, and there's been some remarkable conversation that has started on that. But what Chris and I wanted to do is also tell you that we took it a step further at the request of the good doc, and we dug in just a little bit deeper, and we went and pulled up every Asian woman that has been found in the United States that they didn't know who it was since June 19th. And there are 36 women that law enforcement could potentially follow up on. And so you're going to be able to go in there and look at this map, and you're going to be able to look at even your home. And what we did is we calculated the most probable route that someone would drive in order to end up in that particular position. So you can go in and start exploring this, and we pray that law enforcement is exploring this and looking and not letting one stone come unturned, because the most troubling thing to us, Ellie, as we have looked at your case, is this last tab that we put in here called "Where's Your Father?" in this whole thing. And this is the most painful thing for us to say, because the one that should be supporting you the most and banging the drum to find your mom, either at the direction of his attorney or for some other reason, is remaining quiet. And we pray that we and others can bang this drum loud enough that you can get your mom found and that you can resolve this problem. And so we will be providing you and everyone else with the links to this story map where you can explore it a little further. And we're going to leave with you our commitment that Profiling Evil is not going away. Chris and I are not going away. Dr. Phil is not going away. And he made a comment at the end of his show that I want to just reiterate, and that is that your mom would be so cockeyed proud of you for continuing to look. And we just have grown to love you.
Stay focused, okay, kiddo?
Yeah.
The answers are going to come.
Ellie, the answers will come. And you, once that show came on the air, started to hear from people. Why don't you talk just for a moment about what that experience has been like and what
Yeah, I mean, I've gotten so much support from people around the world and people that I don't know, and they've shared like their own stories of how they struggled, how they've lost parents, um, and they say that it's inspired them. Um, and I truly, all I hope, even if I don't find out what happens, although of course I have hope that I still will, is that if you're going through a tough time, that you can power through it, and it won't always feel the way it does. Everything will be okay. Um, Mental health is really important. I took basically a year before going public with my story because I had my really bad days, and I know that I wouldn't be able be doing what I am right now this time last year. So um, it's important to make sure that you are okay first and foremost. And of course, it's important to advocate for victims and your loved ones and any human out there who went through a similar thing. So yeah, I've gotten an amazing response, definitely, and I just want, yeah, that's what I really want people to know. It's that you will be okay, and life is beautiful and
Well, I can say in behalf of Chris and me, we are grateful that we've come to know who Ellie Green is, and we look forward to seeing the college graduation notice and the master's degree notice and the PhD
You got two new grandpas here.
notice. And we can't wait until Ellie Green starts her own family, and we get to have pictures and see what an amazing human being we know that you will become.
Yeah.
And we also know that your dad grieves. And if there's a mistake that was made, that it needs to be clarified and brought to the surface. But most importantly, this thing that we keep calling your mom's most prized possession needs to know that the heavens also are completely aware of who you are, and they're watching out after you.
Yeah, most definitely.
Ellie, will you come back again?
yeah, of course.
We're going to want to see updates, and we know that there are hundreds of thousands of people that are going to want to know updates, and we look forward to the day that you can jubilantly announce that you know where your mom is. So from all of us at Profiling Evil, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. Thank you.